Good morning, everyone. My name is Mariana Gatto, the director of the Italian American Museum of Los Angeles. A special welcome to IAMLAThe members whose support helps underwrite programs like this. We'd also like to acknowledge a great friend of the museum, the Italian Sons and Daughters of America, and thank them for their assistance in promoting this program. Today we have three very special guests, Idanna Pucci, Thomas Ferraro, and Lynda Bruno. Idanna Pucci is a writer and the author of The Epic Life, a classic on Balinese culture, and Brazza in Congo, a life and legacy that inspired her award-winning documentary, Black Africa, White Marble, which sheds light on Central Africa's colonial past and its troubled present. She also produced talk radio Tehran about women who fulfill their aspirations in Iran's gender apartheid. Her forthcoming book is The World Odyssey of a Balinese Prince. Aside from her mother tongue Italian, she's fluent in English, French, and Indonesian. With her husband, Terrence Ward, she divides her time between her hometown of Florence in Italy and New York. Thomas Ferraro is a professor of English at Duke University, where he teaches literature and the media arts, with special interests in the interplay of religion, caste, and aesthetics. Tom is the author of Feeling Italian, The Art of Ethnicity in America, which was published in 2005. It is a study of the iconography of American Italianness, written in an accessible, colloquial style. Feeling Italian begins with the original publication of Idanna Pucci's account of Maria Barbella, the so-called Lady of Sing Sing, and then treats the painter Joseph Stella, novelists Pietro Di Donato and Mario Puzo, singers Sinatra and Madonna, and a variety of Italianate films, including Moonstruck, Do the Right Thing, and Big Night. His latest book, announced for availability by Christmas, is entitled Transgression and Redemption in American Fiction, which explores the Protestant temptation of Marian Catholicism in the canonical masterworks of AP English, including The Scarlet Letter and The Great Gatsby. Tom reports that going into production, we were still wondering whether several different academic subtitles for Transgression and Redemption, all heavy and pretentious, but then pressed by friends to describe what the book is really about, he likes to quip, "It's reading the US canon like a Southern Italian." Also joining us today is former educator and children's advocate, Lynda Bruno, the great-granddaughter of Maria Barbella. We'd like to thank all of you for joining us. And Idanna, now we'll turn it over to you.
So, yes, I have. So I have to say buongiorno to you, while here it's good night. And, to all of you across the Atlantic and on this side of the Atlantic. And I want to thank you, Marianne, and also Francesca Guerini and Caroline Eaton of the Italian American Museum of Los Angeles for this special opportunity to speak about my book from Florence. So The Lady of Sing Sing, this book, exists because I discovered completely by chance a little booklet written by my great-grandfather in 1920. And after a brief mention of his adored wife, Cora, he wrote about a young Italian immigrant on death row for the murder of a man who had abused her. And the year was 1895. These few paragraphs pulled me like a magnet to find out more, and astonishing events surfaced, revolving around the issues of immigration, domestic violence, women's rights, yellow journalism, corporate greed, criminal justice, and the death penalty. We all carry our DNA traits, in our DNA, traits of our ancestors, and we carry, I believe that we carry their souls with us. And so how can we ignore who has come before? Engaging in going back in time can be a great adventure, and it was for me, and it still is. great adventure. When I asked my editor, Teresa Di Masi at Simon & Schuster, why she wished to publish a book that had been first released 23 years ago, she replied that the story had to be revisited because the questions it posed were more urgent now than ever before. So this new edition was born, revised, expanded, and with a surprising new twist at the end. The subtitle, An American Countess, an Italian Immigrant, and their epic battle for justice in New York's Gilded Age, says almost everything. The American Countess is my great-grandmother, Cora Slocomb. She was born in 1862 at the height of the Civil War, from a Quaker mother, the only child, and a wealthy philanthropist. She grew up in New Orleans and later married an Italian nobleman and settled in Italy in 1887. Cora was not a suffragette, but rather a pioneer activist who took a stand for justice and paid a high price for her relentless commitment. When the story begins in 1895, she was 33 years old. Here she is at 13. She's all dressed in black because her father had just died prematurely, very young man at 45. And this portrait was made by the painter Frank Duveneck from Ohio, who, by the way, spent long periods in my hometown of Florence. The Slocomb house, which is this one that you can see, was a grand sort of Renaissance style house on Esplanade Avenue in New Orleans. And it had an amazing story because meanwhile it has been destroyed, and there is just a green wilderness plot remained. Nothing has been built in its place, but it has an amazing story that I recount in the epilogue. Another incredible coincidence related exactly to Cora and her life. In 1881, Cora was crowned Queen of Carnival. She was 18 in New Orleans as the consort of Rex, which is a really great honor for a young girl. And Rex is the name of the carnival crew that gives its a street parade and a ball, a formal ball on Mardi Gras every year. And it's one of the most famous crews. In 2022, in 2 years, New Orleans will celebrate the 150th anniversary of Rex, and a major exhibition is scheduled to open on January 29. Curator Wayne Phillips of the Louisiana State Museum, who I think is present with us today, even if I can't see him, wants to give Cora a prominent place in the exhibition, also because of who she became later in life. And here we see Cora's husband, De Talmo, my great-grandfather, and their Villa Brazza, north of Venice, where, by the way, I was born. And now the Italian immigrant. The Italian immigrant, Maria Barbella, a sweatshop worker in her early 20s from a village in South Italy. So you see the contrast between these two women who meet in incredible circumstances. Maria was illiterate and did not speak or understand English. She lived with her parents in Mulberry Bend, the infamous neighborhood in Lower Manhattan, probably the worst slum in the city at that time. And here is her beautiful village of Ferrandina. This village she left in, I think, 1892. And it's still so beautiful. Although at that time it was incredibly poor. It's still very authentic, where little has changed today. Maria killed this man, who raped her. He was called Domenico Cataldo, and he pursued her for several months, promising love and marriage, not an unusual thing. But one day he brought Maria into a pub. She had never been into a bar before. Then he slipped a drug into her drink and dragged her upstairs to a room rented by the hour and defiled her. When she finally woke, she knew she could never return home. She was disgraced. And then she found out that he was married in Italy and about to sail back. On his last day in Manhattan, as he was playing cards in a bar, she confronted him. He mocked her with the most vile insults and pushed her away. Maria, in absolute despair, drew a razor. She hoped to injure him so he would not leave to Italy. But the interesting thing is that she wanted to be married, and then he could go to Italy. She just had to be married. She didn't want to live with him or have a family life with him. She had to be married. And this is part of the whole issue of the crime of honor, which is still understood in Italy, in a way, more in the South than in the North, but not in America. Maria was arrested and held in the notorious city prison called the Tombs. Her trial, this is the Tombs. It was really a horrendous place. And the warden of the Tombs was arrested finally. But this is in the epilogue, because the epilogue has what happened to, it was interesting for me to see what happened to all the people, all the characters that I met in the research. And so her trial actually was a travesty. The trial of Maria of Justice, witnessed by an audience of shouting immigrants from Little Italy. Her defense lawyer, appointed by the court, was incompetent, the judge biased, and Maria's testimony marred by a truly bad translator. It still happens, by the way, with immigrants in the courts of Manhattan. She was convicted of first-degree murder, sentenced to death, the first woman destined to the electric chair. She was also the first to be placed on death row in Sing Sing, which was then a male penitentiary. And the newly invented electric chair was installed there. The setting is New York's Gilded Age, with its palatial mansions uptown, when tabloid journalists couldn't wait to feast upon the tragedies of a young, naive Italian immigrant from the dejected and crowded tenements of the Lower East Side. The epic battle of justice is all about arms reaching out across the social divide to rescue a young condemned woman. In my childhood, this is Florence in the 18th century. In my childhood, I learned that Tuscany was the first state in the world to abolish capital punishment in 1786. Growing up with that notion, I got, of course, very interested in this story that had been buried for more than a century. And eventually I managed to piece all the events together, including 2 trials, one of which in 1896 became the trial of the year in New York City. And here you will notice that Maria Barbella's family name has been changed to Barberi. Barberi. Several reporters renamed her to conjure up barbarian or razor, barber. And this was very, it remained, and it remained even on the prison blotters. Only the Italian language papers were accurate, and at first also the New York Times. Today, America is still divided on capital punishment, with 25 states applying it. More federal executions have been carried out under Trump than in the past 57 years combined. This is something that probably few people know. And few people know also that years ago, Governor Ryan of Illinois, a Republican, commuted 167 death sentences to life. Governor Brown of California summed it up. In practice, the death penalty is almost always inflicted on the weak, the poor, the ignorant, and against racial minorities. In 1895, Cora's national campaign against the death penalty was far ahead of time, the first in America, and I think the first one in the world. But Cora was not alone in her battle. Mrs. Rebecca Foster, known as the Angel of the Tombs, was her closest ally and always sat next to Maria in court. Famous suffragettes such as Elizabeth Cady Stanton and Susan B. Anthony spoke at rallies across the country, and they were joined by gentlemen such as the noted intellectual Robert Ingersoll and the tycoon Austin Corbin, who built the Long Island Railroad. Thanks to Cora's campaign, Maria was granted an appeal for a second trial. In the new trial, more than a year later, before a justice system completely governed by men, a formidable defense was mounted to save Maria's life. Also, I want to point out that it wasn't easy for Cora to find lawyers at the time who were opposed to the death penalty and willing to represent Maria. The discussion about whether capital punishment was right or wrong, it hadn't really been ever in the newspapers, for instance. But the second trial was front page news across the country. The issue of immigration has driven debates all over the world, now perhaps more than ever. Mexican immigrants have been painted as murderers and rapists, and the same insults were hurled at Italians at the time of Maria and at the Irish 50 years earlier. Domestic violence, rape, and abuse of women finally have surfaced in public debate around the world. The Me Too movement has shed harsh light on the powers at play. This story from the past reveals much about the present. And few know that Thomas Edison masterminded the movement to replace the noose with the electric chair as a method of execution in New York State. He knew that the chair could only function with Westinghouse's strong AC current. By stoking terror, Edison hoped to secure the monopoly of electricity with his own DC current that was weaker and much more expensive. Cora had no idea that her activism was defying the macabre plan of America's greatest inventor. The Lady of Sing Sing highlights the immoral depths to which business tycoons can sink to secure more profits. And today, think of Silicon Valley, of Zuckerberg, of Bill Gates, and nothing much has changed. The story also draws attention to Cora's rapport with her husband. Here she's standing next to her grandfather, while her husband holds their little daughter Idanna, my grandmother, after whom I was named. Their love story stands in stark contrast with Maria's. Cora founded the first cooperatives in Italy where peasant women could learn a craft to improve their conditions. In this way, she hoped to slow down the waves of Italian immigration. She was very idealistic, but she succeeded a little bit. She was a labor organizer, as well as a gifted artist with a true sense of modern marketing. The cooperatives exported their lace works internationally, winning many awards, also the Chicago World Fair in 1893. Cora served as president of the Committee on Peace and Arbitration of the American Council of Women, which laid the foundations of the League of Nations that later became the United Nations. As a convinced pacifist, she designed the first peace flag, which was unfurled in August 1897 at the International Peace Convention in Mystic, Connecticut. Maria's second trial was a cause célèbre. All the new sciences were on display, from phrenology to psychiatry, even astrology and palm reading. And the battle of experts went on for a month. This time, Maria did not need a translator. In prison, she had learned English and could speak for herself. One of the reporters present every day in the packed audience was the son of the author of The Scarlet Letter, the journalist Julian Hawthorne. And I quote his words, which he wrote in the paper day by day. I had to make an effort with my imagination to understand the situations she described, the characters, their impulses. Yet it was impossible to look away, to hold the ear from listening. In her story were the elements of the great tragedies of this mortal life. That small Italian seamstress felt the same passion and despair that moved the heroines of history and poetry. She was the sister of them all. A few days after Maria's acquittal, the headline of the New York Journal of December 31st, 1896 read, Maria Barbera, a heroine, risked her life to rescue women from flames. And yes, there was a huge fire in Little Italy and in the building next door to Maria. And so she just saved this woman and redeemed herself even more. And I want to end with this image painted on a huge wall that today dominates one of the squares of Ferrandina, where Maria was born in the region of Basilicata in southern Italy, a few miles from the native village of Francis Ford Coppola. By the way, everyone in Ferrandina knows the story of Cora and Maria. The Lady of Sing Sing is in the high school curriculum. The mural represents an idealized Maria Barbella holding the flame of hope. It remains lit only one night a year, on November 30th. In a few days, it will be lit, because Ferrandina is one of 1,200 cities for life around the world, like Los Angeles and New York. And in New York is the town hall that is lit all night, that commemorate the day when Tuscany abolished the death penalty back in 1786. And like a miracle, 2 years ago, I finally met the great-granddaughter of Maria Barbella. After searching for 20 years and giving up all hope, her name is Lynda Bruno. Here we are together in Ferrandina, where she received from the mayor a document that allowed her to apply for Italian citizenship. And Lynda is with us today from her home in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. And I welcome you, Lynda. It's lovely that you are participating with us.
My absolute pleasure.
Thank you, Lynda, so much again for joining us. You and Idanna bring this century-old case to life. So tell us, growing up, what did you know about your great-grandmother, Maria Barbella?
Absolutely nothing. I had no idea that she existed. I didn't know her name, nothing.
So how did you come to discover your family's connection to this historic case?
My brother and I were raised to be very proud of our Italian heritage, and we knew, as fourth generation Italian Americans, we knew that at least 3 sets of our great grandparents were from Italy. So, we knew that 2 of the sets were from Sicily, 1 was from Naples, but we didn't know anything about my father's family. For most of my life, my grandfather, my father's father, Charles Bruno, he was in my life. I think when he passed, I was 35. So throughout the years, because I've always been curious, because we were raised to be proud of our heritage, I was always very curious about the Italian language. I took Italian in high school and college. I wish I could speak it better, but so always curious about our culture, our background. And throughout the years, I would ask my grandfather, where did your family come from? And questions about his parents. Mm-hmm. And he refused to answer them. He was a lovely man. And so he would just smile, but he would not answer. Mm-hmm. And I just, over the years, became increasingly more curious, to the point of frustration, because I wanted to know. Mm-hmm. For some reason, it was a secret. And my grandmother wouldn't say either. I don't know if she knew his history, mm-hmm. But if she did, she kept it also a well-kept secret.
Do you think it was shame, or what do you attribute his hesitation to?
Well, now knowing, maybe it was, yes, probably so.
And remind us, how exactly did you discover?
Well, after my daughter was born, it became even more important to me to find out about my heritage. So I began to do some searching on ancestry.com, mm-hmm. and I was able to uncover my grandfather, Charles Bruno, birth certificate. So I finally found out who his parents were. They were Francesco Bruno and Maria Barbella. Okay, so now I had their names, and I added them to my tree on Ancestry, and that was the end of that. And I saw that they came from Ferrandina. And then maybe, 6 months or so later, I had received a message from a stranger on Ancestry asking me if the Maria Barbella and the Francesco Bruno on my tree is the Maria Barbella, who was quite famous. I had no idea what she was talking about, and I thought, no, it can't possibly be. And through more discussions with this woman, mm-hmm. who I owe, a huge debt of gratitude, I discovered that indeed the Maria Barbella in my tree was the Maria Barbella who Idanna has written about. That was mind-blowing.
I can only imagine.
Yeah.
So how has learning about your connection to this this case kind of changed the way you see yourself, or has it changed the way you see yourself and your family?
It almost has brought me full circle, because now I always have had a love for Italy, but now I've been there many times. It feels, I've been to Ferrandina. I've met the wonderful people there. I feel like I have a family there. So it has actually made images in my mind of what Italy is like. It's made it real for me. It's made it real. It's complete. It almost has brought my search for my past to full circle. Mm-hmm. It's come full circle. And so that's a really neat feeling.
And one more question before we turn it over to Tom. How did you connect with Idanna? Tell us that story.
Oh gosh. Well, at the same time that I received that message on Ancestry.com from the woman I mentioned who originally asked me about Maria, that same day, this woman must have reached out to other people who had Maria Barbella in their tree. And then so someone else who turned out to be a long lost cousin, it messaged me as well. And it introduced me to herself, her family, and she is a direct descendant of Maria's sister, Antonia. And so her name was, my cousin's name is Lillian. If you're watching, Lillian, hello. So Lillian told me about Idanna because Idanna, they had already met with you, right?
Yes, I just received an email from, because there are 3 cousins.
Yeah.
You know, they're all related to Maria's sister, and they happened to find the book I wrote 23 years ago, but I found it, you know, perhaps 5 or 6 years ago, because again, one of them is interested in genealogy and does a lot of research, and they read it, and they were completely shocked. They were between shocked and overwhelmed, and so they reached out to me through. I think that they found my email anyway, and but they didn't know anything about Lynda, nothing.
Yeah,
and
that
so,
was.
Lynda, didn't you do a DNA test with them? I think something like
Well,
that.
I have done one, and I think, I'm not sure if it was Lillian, but one of them, we are connected. We do share DNA. So, but I think it was Lillian who gave me your email address and said, "Oh, you need to contact Idanna." So, Lillian, Cheryl, and Arlene. I hope you're watching.
Then what happened? They read the book.
Yeah.
Lynda read the book, and her father, the grandson of Maria Barbella, Ron, read the book. And the next thing I hear is that they were crying all the time reading it, because they realized how much this woman had suffered, and how much, you know, how much, you know, they had no idea, but also the situation of this young girl, you know, this young woman. And so they, you know, they found out so much, you know.
Yes.
It's fantastic. Thank you for sharing that.
This is stunning stuff. I think most of you out there must know. I have my own stories about tripping over the trials of Maria Barbella, but if I start in that direction, I will seem like an ordinary human to you. And I've been invited instead today to play the prof. All right. So what I'm going to do is break all my rules. I'm actually going to read, which I actually don't do as a teacher, but I'm going to read a bit so that we can go with Idanna's book into some of the detail involving Maria Barbella and the trials to make a little feisty argument. My mother likes to say, good Italian boys quote their mother. All right, my mother likes to say, I am contrary. So here's something of a contrary argument, although it's really a both and argument. I'm a both and guy, in part because I believe that Catholicism is conjunctive and Puritanism is disjunctive. So here we go. Oh, and over the long term, I swear to you that the key to really reading Julian Hawthorne's father's novel, The Scarlet Letter, correctly, the way Hawthorne wrote it, is to know the story of Maria Barbella as Idanna Pucci has told it. And on that note, I better read or we won't have time. I will try to look up. My camera's over my head anyway, so it's a little strange. Deep breath. The Southern Italian peasants who came to the United States during the Great Migration, that's 1880 to 1970, first as sojourners, later as settlers, to help and build and run the industrial cities, were the proudest of peoples. Having suffered for centuries at the hands of the landowners and the governmental authorities and the church, the weather and the fates, they had long before, molti anni fa, established distinctive ways of making do and of making sense. The mother-centered order of the family for all practical intents and purposes, the virgin for the expression of hope and the renewal of courage, the cult of honor for communal intrigue and masculine self-esteem. They were ferocious realists who understood where power lay and why it was wielded, but they would have hated to be considered anyone's victim. Idanna Pucci brings us a story of a common laborer from the darkest era in Italian American history, the first one, that of arrival. Yet it is a story in their spirit, not of backbreaking work and studied isolation unto death, a commonplace narrative, but rather of a curious victory, or rather, to be more precise, a series of victories in their earliest dealings with official America. Victories so improbable, paradoxical in how they occurred, contrary in their implications, yet wondrous for all that they feel like acts of grace. Idanna researched for 10 years like a woman possessed. She not only had the tenacity to persist against all odds, that's fire after fire, turning up court transcripts, the trial appeal, all kinds of letters from various interlocutors. The 1896 run of the country's most important Italian language newspaper, and of course, the voluminous English language newspaper and magazine archive. Lots of pictures too. But she also had the patience, skill, and sensibility to shape the myriad pieces of the public record into what is, in effect, a documentary novel. In its overall architecture, The Lady of Sing Sing preserves the ambiguity of the archive, as Pucci lets the materials speak in their contrary complexity, and she invites the reader to share in the intrigue of deciphering the historical record, with subtle pointers to Pucci's own investigative suspense. In my book, Feeling Italian, I attend to what Pucci seems to be saying sotto voce, and I do so with increasing urgency because what I hear there, under Pucci's breath, reminds us that the good stuff is never neat, never nice. Ultimately, at issue in The Lady of Sing Sing is, I believe, a mystery dance between political correctness and lived history, that is, between the contemporary intellectual mandate to unearth how Southern Italians were once racially denigrated and systematically mistreated, which is true, and the transatlantic appetite for ascertaining illicit sexuality, exacting just revenge, and crediting divine intercession, which is even more true. On the face of the public record, the first part of Maria Barbella's history reads like a series of spiraling victimizations, up to and including her sentence. The second part, beginning with the series of interventions, like a victory for social justice engineered by a sympathetic and generous elite within the public sphere. It appears to be, for lack of a better term, a righteous story of a poor immigrant girl done wrong, dealing in the terms of domestic containment, sexual exploitation, and ethnic scapegoat. She's saved from the grotesque compounding of injustices, from the legal system's logic of blaming the victim by liberal, then called progressivist, activism, including the sentimental wing of the feminist establishment and the enlightened element within the scientific community, whose cast of characters can be forgiven their tendency to patronize, given the enormity of what was at stake, a woman's life and a people's reputation. The fact of Maria's epilepsy, including a remarkably timed, nearly full-bore blackout, made Maria superhuman and less than human, while masking how and why she was all too human. Indeed, the opportunity to assign Maria's mysterious behavior to a temporary bout of mental illness seems heaven sent, given the legal jeopardy in which she found herself. But with 2020 hindsight, we can also see how well the fit served Maria, both before. How does a poor Italian girl solve a problem like Cataldo? And after, how does a good Catholic girl live with a solution like Maria's? More than once, in ironies of almost surreal proportion, Maria's epilepsy got her into a double bind, only to set her free. The time-honored Italian peasant cult of honor is apparently what got Maria Barbella into so much trouble. The progressive American culture of personal self-transformation, political intervention, and genetic neurology is apparently what got her out. But there was a dialectic at play between the two. Tradition is modernity, the Italian is American, that requires our final attention. To the delight of her family and community, America proved its boast of justice when Maria was saved as if by miracle by forces that would seem to have been, and to a large extent must have been, very much outside her control. Ambitious activists, legal technicalities, forensic medicine. But the information that Idanna Pucci was able to gather is not yet all before us. And there is another trajectory to the story. Maria's gumption, her resourcefulness, including perhaps intuitive guile that yields a spicier dimension to the narrative. If as a victim several times over, worked to the bone, exploited in love, demonized by the press, objectified by social workers, and railroaded by the career criminal justice system, Maria Barbella illustrates what the immigrants faced upon arrival. Then, as the ultimate victor, set free from Cataldo, exonerated before the law, liberated from public spectacle, both her life and dignity restored, Maria illustrates how it all began, the century-long transfusion of Italian blood rights into American possibility. Now, here I warn you, I'm giving you one spoiler. You're not going to hear about my favorite part of this book, but you're going to get a spoiler. So if you want to turn off for 2 minutes, because you know you're going to read The Lady of Sing Sing, then turn off for 2 minutes and then come back. Here we go. This is the final push. Maria let herself believe, so others could believe, that she was merely and only a confused, conscientious, love-besotted girl, overwhelmed, tragically lost even to herself by a devastating fit at the final hour. But was it so? The very first fact that about Maria that Pucci enters into the narrative record concerns the obscure night when Cataldo first took the girl's honor. The one thing Maria knew for sure about how it happened was that her clothing, a long wide skirt, several underskirts, corsets, tailored blouses, and stockings, had not been torn. Idanna first comments, and I quote, "When a man wanted a woman, he had to make his way through layers and layers of material. Unless, obviously, she desired him enough to take her clothes off." Pucci's unless dangles in a teasing flash, an ambiguous inflection, baiting us with the idea of something close to informed consent, which would mean that Maria had been flirting, however momentarily, with the explicit transgression of Southern Italian sexual mores. Given that peasant norms and obligations were at stake, even a small element of rebellious self-determination puts a more difficult ethical spin on the affair than drug-induced violation alone, what everyone presumed at the time, even the many non-Italians who proclaimed she should fry. Almost done. There are two parishes in the medieval township of Ferrandina, where the trains still do not go and where the town folk no longer remember anyone by the surname Barbella. Well, that's been fixed. And yet, in the second of the church's records, Pucci discovers that there was indeed born to Michele and Filomena Barbella a girl child christened Maria at 6 a.m. on October 14th, 1868. In 1868, which means that in April 1895, when Domenico Cataldo lost his life to the razor, Maria Barbella was not 22 years old, which is old enough, as was taken for granted in every single instance of the public record, but nearly 5 years older. For once, Pucci speculates out loud. When Cataldo rejected her, she may well have lost hope of ever getting married in her mind. It may have been her last chance. In 1895, an unmarried woman in her late 20s was already doomed to a life as a spinster, which, I might add, involved full-time service first to her younger siblings and then to her aging parents, untouched by companionate love or physical intimacy her whole life long. The knowledge of Maria's real age suggests a reassessment of Maria's attitude toward the affair itself, casting it in a more consensual light despite Cataldo's practiced subterfuge. Pucci doesn't quite say it, but could Maria have been tempted originally by the idea of receiving the love that she felt was long overdue, which while at the same time setting a last-ditch marriage trap? Wouldn't Domenico have to keep his promise? Conclusion. There can be no doubt about Idanna Pucci's role as tenacious researcher and inspired history teller in all this. What takes my breath away from Pucci's reconstruction is that as a story, despite or rather because it is sequenced, nuanced, and understated with historical rigor, it feels so Italian. The Lady of Sing Sing does great justice to the public record it establishes, slowly inviting a social and ethical triumphalism in order to let us in on the full power of the darker realism of an Italian women's omerta, women's plural. The exquisite little secret that Domenico Cataldo's death just may have been a calculated act of vengeance, and Maria Barbella's freedom, a gift of blessed fate. Once apprised of the full record, we are in a position to feel what secretly Maria Barbella and those closest to her must have felt, what Cora Slocomb di Brazza must have eventually intuited, and what author Idanna Pucci has crafted her documentary novel to show us. Barbella's is the story not only of male predatory opportunism, but of female sexual transgression, not only of physiological accident, but of self-rescuing vengeance, not only of U.S. Penal Code justice, but of Italian-style common law mercy. Whatever we import of Barbella's electric fit on her momentary volition, a year and some months later, Maria Barbella stood before an all-American jury and got away in cultural, much more than in literal terms, with murder. And there we go. Now we talk.
Tom?
Yeah.
Now, no, I'm overwhelmed by what you say, but you know better than I that in that time, and also all the research we can do, there is a complete ambiguity about everything. And first of all, I'm not certain that she knew her age exactly.
Ah, yes. So you can begin. All right. So if you begin with the last fact,
yeah, because
I am taking creative license.
You know, going through Ellis Island, you know, they changed names, they changed everything, you know. And then I think that she really, really was completely naive. And there is so much proof of how naive she was. And this man pursued her relentlessly for many months. And of course, her sister Antonia was already married, and there was a real darkness on, you know, already 22 was quite old for a woman at that time.
Yes, already.
Yeah, and I don't know, I really haven't, you know, I tried to work on these ambiguities, you know, and I think it's one of the good things about the story and the book, because it really reflects what the times were like.
Yeah, you staged them beautifully without trying to resolve them.
You know what I
pushed the case to underscore the.
Also, when the book came out years ago the first time, somebody called me, a professor from the John Jay Criminal Justice College in New York. And they wanted to meet me, and they said, but do you realize we are giving this to read to the students because all the trials of immigrants, yes, there was a stenographer in court, but they were thrashed immediately after. So we don't have any example of a trial, you know, of immigrants. And that's why the book, because I reconstructed the trials word by word, you know. But I really, there is, you know, at the end, epilepsy, her age and all that it's a real surprise. And it was a very big surprise for me too.
Well, one of the smart things that you do is say, since you find out the age very, very late in the writing process,
yes,
one of the virtues of the book is that you stay, it's told in the third, in a first person, and you end up, there's a sort of novelistic flow through where the suspense, I'm an English professor, where the reader's suspense is generated because we identify with you as the investigative source, even as the story itself is coming forward. And so it's overdetermined, aesthetic, you know, overdetermined in the sense that there's an art to letting it, and there's an art to letting it all sit ambiguously, and then adding another fact that still doesn't quite resolve it. And what I do is I press it further than a historian can or should rightly do.
So, you know, one of the many striking images from Idanna's presentation is the caricature that asserts Maria could be identified as a degenerate based on certain phenotypes or physical characteristics, namely her ears. So, you know, a question for you, Tom, do you see or do you perceive, you know, the discourses surrounding Maria Barbella and the way the media initially treated her as reflective of the growing eugenics movement in the United States, late 19th century tensions surrounding immigration, and the nation's sentiments towards Italian immigrants in particular?
Yeah, there's no question. It's a NAS cartoon gone scientific. All right, so that when And the illustrations, Idanna can say where they came from, but several of them are published in the popular media.
Mhm.
And so they're doing ears, they're doing the shape of her forehead, all this. What is so stunning about this is that the phrenologist can come in during the second trial and say, oh, it looks like somebody has epilepsy. In other words, what it does is it turns it's just poetic justice in that. And there's the prejudicial leveraging of a certain kind of pseudoscientific racism, which is what she's caught in. The pseudoscience of determining intelligence and morality from putative facial structures gets not just overturned, but in some ways deployed by the forensic science of epilepsy that says that she had no consciousness and no control at the moment, so that they could turn the prejudice to liberate her.
Yes.
And that is sardonic, and the kind of sardonicness I actually think the less naive Southern Italians would have chuckled with, you know. I'm tempted toward a gesture, a physical gesture.
There is something else which one tends to forget. It's the role of Edison in all of this, of the great inventor, because she was, if a woman, a young woman like that would have been executed, would have been electrocuted, really the whole of the public opinion would have gone against the Westinghouse current, you see, and he would have,
Idanna, if I might interject, that's actually one of the questions that we received from the audience. You know, your presentation mentioned, you know, Thomas Edison's involvement in the movement to replace the noose with the electric chair. Can you expand a little bit on that? Just give the audience a little bit more background.
No, absolutely, because like it happens today with, you know, the whole idea of fake news and all that, Edison, there were some journalists, and particularly one that was at the payroll of Edison. So, you know, all the reports of the trial of Maria Barbella were all negative, and he wanted her to be executed, you see. So there was the press, and Cora really does the press. She goes from newspaper to newspaper, you know, trying to bring the papers to understand this girl, you know, and to understand what a travesty trial she had gone, you know, through. And so there is this great force. It's like a tsunami, you know, that Cora in her battle for, you know, to bring some kind of justice and a proper trial, she didn't know she was surrounded by this Edison campaign, you know, Edison's effort. And that was huge, you know. So because one, you know, it was a time, it was the dawn of electricity, it was the dawn of many, you know, the dawn of certain debates about, not yet about human rights, but really, you know, women, the suffragettes trying to get a say. Yes. And all these trials, even of women.
And on that note, you know, some of the most well-known activists of the time, as you mentioned in the presentation, including Elizabeth Cady Stanton and Susan B. Anthony, used Maria's case to critique the double standard in domestic violence prosecution. How do you think their actions, and this can, you know, question for either of you, how do you think their actions impacted the case and shaped the debate surrounding women's rights?
Well, I think that because there were also quite a few men who sustained them, and tried to campaign, you know, against capital punishment, then it succeeded in a way, you know. There were as many men as women, you know, at the time. And this I found very, very interesting, you know. Yes, it was impact, because many newspapers, you know, they started against, and then slowly you could see they changed, you know, they changed towards her. So it had impact.
And on that note, let's also discuss a little bit about, you know, the concept of a crime of honor, you know, specifically how Maria would have defined this concept.
She did.
Maria and Italians of her era would have defined this concept, as opposed to, say, American audiences reading about the case in the newspaper. And again, that's, you know, both for you and Tom.
Well, one of the good things that that Stanton and Anthony and you quote Idanna, you quote an Italian. They brought a very articulate explanation for the way in which the cult of honor worked in southern Italy, and then how then it was a policing mechanism for sexual self-determination, that there was a, you know, a squeeze play from both sides onto the young women that were caught in this. And yeah, and so.
But was that notion kind of unknown to Americans? I mean, it's still kind of less of a cultural concept here than, say, in Italy. How, you know, was there like a process to kind of educate folks, you know, during the second trial about this cultural notion? Not so much.
I don't believe, no.
No, the whatever might have happened in particular higher brow, or that word hasn't quite been invented yet, but kind of more New York Timesy. It was offset by an enormous literal iconography of Maria Barbella, who became a wax figure, you know, down in Coney Island, and she becomes a wax figure. You know, the razor is practically a stiletto. You've got a drunken bar scene. You've got gore, and you've got yellow journalists so guilty. They're this is another card, but you have a couple. You have a couple of really ethicalist newspapermen. Chaplin.
No, Chapin.
Yeah, Chapin, who is manipulating both sides of this from behind the scenes, and they probably outshouted. It's just that House and Friend were well commissioned for this job, and the women behind the scene, you know, Foster and Cora were magnificent. But it was, but I don't think it got out quite so much. And and the luck kept coming. McIntyre, the prosecuting attorney, is very, very capable, but boy, does he make a mistake.
Yes. So I think
one thing one forgets, you know, that Cora was really persecuted by the people of her class, you know, of her society. For years they thought, what is she doing? She was, you know, because she mixed with the death penalty. And even nowadays, you know, Bianca Jagger started to you know, be an activist you know, but one doesn't know really why. One doesn't know really. I mean, she visited prisoners at one point, and the newspapers, the media talked about it. But there are very few women of sort of high society who would ever mix with the prisons.
Which is actually
daughter of the Confederacy.
I want to ask you, Idanna, your great grandmother Cora was, of considerable means, and she enjoyed a good life. What do you think drew her to Maria's case and led her to become, Maria's fiercest advocate?
Well, first of all, she really felt that America, she says that America was like a huge black canvas with many lights, that there was a darkness about American society, and we witness that now. We've heard it even recently. Some reporters or some, on television, some programs, they say, oh, America is this vast country, vast continent, and it has such dark, but it has also extraordinary people. So she, as an American, she absolutely didn't want, this girl to be the scapegoat of, being judged and be executed by her fellow Americans, and she also loved Italy, and loved her husband. And so she was quite wealthy, but she used all her money for lost causes, or she was a true activist, and she really felt, well, her father was a philanthropist and died actually in the equivalent of Katrina in New Orleans, bringing food to people, bringing, he was a prominent man in New Orleans. He was on the board of banks. But he was also a firefighter, which never happens, You would never hear today of
no, not at all.
Firefighter. So she had an example in him, a great example in her mother with the Quaker mentality. So she couldn't conceive life otherwise. And she found in her husband the real mate. And he was an inventor. He didn't waste his time. He accompanied her in New York. He helped her, but he had his own agenda. He invented a special postal machine that was presented was in the Scientific American also. He was a very practical inventor to make life easier for people. So he was also ahead of time, and he supported her in everything. This was really, so, but she felt really American.
Understand. So I think we have time for one more question, and we've received actually several inquiries from the audience as to whether there is a film in the works. Many people have expressed that this would make such a great, movie, dramatization. Any talk of that? There's been a film in the works since 23 years. Okay.
The story of the film of this book could be a book in itself. Really, from 20th Century Fox to Miramax, to many things. So at this point, I just sit back. I've got the rights back. I managed to have.
Because I was going to ask you, do they keep buying the rights from you?
Yes.
Yeah, it's one of the craziest things of all about Hollywood. Money spent on movies they don't make. It drives you crazy. Anyway, they should give it to Sophia.
Sofia Coppola, yes, it's very difficult to get to her. But really, you know, I'm very fatalistic at this point, you know, because the reasons why this film wasn't made is because things happened that had actually nothing to do with the script or the thing. For instance, in the case of Miramax, it's because at the same time, the gangs of New York were being shot, and they made these incredible sets in Cinecittà, Rome, which would have been used for Maria Barbella because it was exactly the neighborhood downtown. And then Miramax went bankrupt because of the gangs of New York. So
It's like the fires.
So the head of Miramax, whose name I'm not going to say today, called me and said, never again, I want to see a movie historical about immigrants, you know, and New York. So I got the rights back, you see, and things happened like that, you know. So I'm very fatalistic.
Well, perhaps perhaps Maria Barbella's story will be brought to the screen in the future nonetheless. I mean, the time is definitely, you know, this story touches upon so many issues relevant to our time, and I think it would make for a wonderful film. So, you know, thank you all again for joining us, Idanna, Tom, Lynda. We've tremendously enjoyed this. I think it's a huge feat that we've also executed it from 4 different time zones. So thank you all. And I'd also like to just take a moment to announce our next program. On December 10th, our guest will be author Carla Gambescia, whose presentation, Buon Natale, examines the origins of some of the most beloved holiday traditions, from Babbo Natale to candy canes. So definitely a departure from what we're discussing now, but thank you all so much again, and please stay safe, and we look forward to seeing you soon, hopefully at the museum when things return to whatever we call normal.
Yes.
Indeed.
Ciao.
Ciao.
Bye.
Bye, everybody. Lynda, bye.
Bye, Donna.